You ever see a birthday cake that feels like evidence? Not celebration. Evidence. When I pushed open Margaret Hale's front door yesterday afternoon, the first thing I saw wasn't her. It was that cake. White frosting. One slice missing. Candle burned all the way down. No plates laid out. No wrapping paper. No second coffee cup. 94 years old. And no one came. Now if you're like me, you already formed a judgment. You're thinking, her family forgot her. That's what I thought too. That's why I drove 4 hours into the Colorado mountains, past the last gas station, past the last mailbox with paint still on it. But before I could even ask, she said something that changed the direction of this whole story. I told them not to. She didn't whisper it. Didn't defend it. Just set it there between us like a loaded tool on a workbench. I'm standing in her kitchen right now as I tell you this. Wood stove ticking. Wind pushing against the windows hard enough to make the panes hum. There's a quiet up here that isn't peaceful. It's deliberate. Margaret is 94. She lives alone. Has for 35 years. 4 children. All gone now, lived long lives, she says, and she says it's steady. No drama. No trembling lip. Grandchildren scattered across 3 states. None of them come up the mountain anymore. Because she asked them not to. She pours me coffee in a chipped mug and sits down across from me like we've known each other longer than 10 minutes. Her hands are broad and scarred, knuckles thick from work. These are not decorative hands. These are decision hands. Why? Ask her. Because I didn't raise them to carry me, she says. And there it is, the creed. The spine of her life. She was a nurse during the war. Stateside but close enough to broken young men to understand something early. Dignity matters. She buried her first husband young. Built a business with her second. Sold it when he got sick so there wouldn't be debt. Raised 4 children without leaning on anyone. Independence wasn't a personality trait. It was oxygen. But oxygen, if you seal a room too tight, can turn thin. There's a phone on her counter. Old flip model. I notice the volume is all the way down. You don't miss calls that way. Yes. She doesn't smile. Not by accident. That's when I feel something tighten in my chest. You see, my mother's called me 3 times this week. Nothing urgent. Just checking in. Been busy. I'll call her back tonight, I keep telling myself. Margaret reaches under the table and brings up a small tin box. The kind people keep sewing needles in. She sets it in front of me but doesn't open it yet. In here, she says, is the night I chose wrong. The wind hits the house hard like punctuation. Happened 14 years ago. Winter. Snow waist deep. Her oldest son called. Mom, he said, come down here. Stay with us until spring. You shouldn't be up there alone. She told me she remembers every word she used. I am not helpless, she told him. Don't treat me like I am. He tried to soften it. She made it firmer. I don't need saving, she said. That was the last serious conversation they ever had. Few months later he was gone. Heart trouble. 72 years old. She didn't get a final call. Didn't make one either. Margaret finally opens the tin box. Inside is an airline ticket. Dated 2 weeks before he died. Non-refundable. Used. He sent it anyway, she says. I left it in the drawer. She doesn't cry. She doesn't dramatize it. She just presses her thumb against the edge of the ticket like it might cut her. I thought strength meant standing alone, she says quietly. I didn't know it could cost you your last goodbye.
And how expensive has that mistake been? I don't know, but this is story real interesting. What you think so?
Now I've interviewed veterans who lost friends in combat. I've interviewed businessmen who lost companies. I've interviewed men who lost marriages they didn't fight hard enough for. But there's something about missing a final goodbye that lands differently at our age. Because if you're watching this right now, you know time doesn't stretch the way it used to. Do your grandchildren know that? Ask her. They know I love them, she says. That's not what I asked. She meets my eyes. No flinch. They know I'm proud. The phone is still on silent. You could turn it up, I say. She looks at it like it's an animal she hasn't decided to trust. I could, she answers. There's the choice. Not dramatic, not cinematic. Just a tiny switch on the side of a phone. Up here, in a house balanced against the edge of the world, strength and loneliness look almost identical. That's the part one didn't understand on the drive up. You can build a life so solid that no one feels allowed to knock on the door. As I pack my notebook, she reaches over and flips the phone open. She presses one button. The volume goes up just a notch. If it rings, she says, I won't let it go to quiet again. And as I step outside into the cold, I realize something I didn't expect to admit to you. I don't know if her story is about being forgotten. I think it might be about choosing not to be needed. And tomorrow, she's agreed to tell me the sentence she wishes she could take back. Tonight I've got a call of my own to make. This morning she doesn't offer coffee. She's already at the table when I step inside. Tin box open. Airline ticket laid flat like a photograph of a crime scene. The wind is louder today. Or maybe I'm just listening harder. You said there was a sentence, I remind her. She doesn't answer right away. Instead she turns the ticket so I can see the date clearly. January 14th. 2 weeks before her son died. I kept it, she says. So I wouldn't ever soften the memory. If you've lived long enough, you know there are moments you replay not to forgive yourself, but to stay honest. Before she gives me the sentence, she takes me back further. Not to the war this time. Not to the business. To something smaller. More ordinary. The day her youngest daughter fell off a bike at 7 years old. She skinned both knees, Margaret says. Blood everywhere. She looked at me and asked if I would carry her home. I didn't. I told her to stand, Margaret says evenly. I said, you're not broken. You're just hurt. The girl stood. Walk home bleeding. I was proud of her, Margaret says. And proud of myself. She pauses. I never asked whether she needed carrying. That's the pattern. Not cruelty. Principle. Years later, when her husband got sick, she did the same thing. When fear entered the room, she tightened, not softened. After he died, her children circled her the way good children do. They made plans without saying the word decline. Bare bedroom. Closer doctors. Easier winters. She heard something else in their voices. Pity. I couldn't bear it, she tells me. I had spent my life being the strong one. So she moved up here. High ground. Literal and otherwise. Now we come to January. Snow thick. Roads half closed. Her oldest son calling again. Mom, he said, please. Just for the winter. We'll figure the rest out later. She felt something rise in her. Something hot and sharp. I did not raise you to rescue me, she told him. He went quiet. She didn't stop. And I am not moving into my own obituary before I have to. That was the sentence. Not just refusal. Dismissal. He said, that's not what this is. Margaret's voice is steady but thinner now. And I said, then let me live the way I taught you to. They hung up civil. Respectful. Controlled. 2 months later he was dead. She found out from her neighbor, not from the family. By then arrangements were already underway. She drove down the mountain alone for the funeral. Stood beside her daughter-in-law. Shook hands. No one mentioned the winter call. But in her mind it played on repeat. After the service she sat in her car in the parking lot. Key in ignition. Engine off. Phone in her hand. I almost called his number, she tells me. Just to hear his voicemail. She looks at me now. I didn't. Why? Yes. Because I didn't want to feel small.
I kept wondering how many of our strong moments are just fear wearing better clothes.
There it is. Cost. Not abandonment. Not neglect. An identity so rigid it couldn't bend toward tenderness. If you're watching this and you've ever doubled down in an argument because backing up felt like surrender, you understand this kind of strength. Protects your spine. Hollows your house. Her grandchildren kept coming for a few years. Shorter visits, quicker departures. They learned her rhythm. She didn't need help, didn't want assistance, didn't answer late-night calls. Eventually they stopped testing the door. Did you notice when the visits changed? Asked. Yes. What did you do? Nothing. She says it without drama. That's the part that keeps me awake, she adds. Not what I said. What I refused to say after. She reaches for the phone now. Runs her thumb along the edge. I thought if I called first, she says, I would become the needy one. And what would have been so wrong with that? Ask. She looks directly at me. No softness. It would have meant I was aging. Not dying. Aging. For a woman who survived war hospitals, widowhood twice, business collapse and rebuild, aging was the enemy she could not command. I tell her about my own habit of postponing calls. Of assuming time is flexible. She listens without interruption. Busy, she says finally. That word hides pride very well. The wind hits the house again. Harder this time. The mountain doesn't care about dignity. So what now? Ask. She doesn't hesitate. I decide whether strength means never asking, she says, or finally admitting I want to be heard. That's the choice still alive at 94. Not whether she can chop wood. Whether she can dial 10 numbers and risk sounding smaller than she used to be. When I leave today, the phone is still in her hand. And I don't know which is heavier, the mountain air or the silence she built to survive. Tomorrow, she says she'll tell me whether she's ready to lower the walls she climbed to feel safe. Tonight I'm not waiting to see who calls first. The phone rang before I knocked. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just a sharp, ordinary sound cutting through mountain air that usually swallows everything. Margaret was already standing at the counter when I stepped inside. The phone lay open in her palm like something alive. She didn't look at me. She looked at the screen. Unknown number, she said. Now, if you've ever hesitated before answering a call, you know that half-second stretch. The small courtroom in your head. Could be nothing. Could be everything. Are you going to pick it up? Yes. She didn't answer that either. The ringing stopped. Silence came back harder than before. She set the phone down carefully, as if it might bruise. Then she let out the kind of breath that doesn't belong to a 94-year-old woman. It belonged to someone much younger. Someone bracing. Would you have answered? She asked me. I didn't lie. I don't know. That's the truth most of us live in. We don't know until the moment demands it. She nodded once. No judgment. Just recognition. Outside the wind had dropped. The mountain was still. It felt like everything was waiting with her. I didn't raise them to chase me, she said quietly. And they didn't raise you, I replied before I could stop myself. That landed. She looked at me in a way that told me I had stepped across the invisible line between observer and participant. You're right, she said after a moment. They didn't. She sat down slowly, hands folded on the table. Not defensive. Not rigid. Just thinking. You asked me yesterday what strength is, she continued. I've been wrong about it. That's not a small admission from someone who survived what she survived. When my husband was dying, she said. He told me something I didn't want to hear. She hadn't told me this part before. He said, Margaret, you don't let anyone carry you. Not even me. She brushed her thumb over the wood grain of the table. I thought he meant I was dependable. And now? Yes. Now I think he meant I didn't know how to rest. If you're watching this and you've spent your life being the reliable one, the one who doesn't fall apart, you understand how foreign rest can feel. How dangerous it looks. The phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't unknown. She froze. The name on the screen was her grandson, Daniel. First visit in 12 years. Last real conversation maybe 5. She didn't move. The ringing felt louder than it was. Margaret, I said softly, not as a journalist now but as a man who understood the weight of a moment. This is it. Her jaw tightened, not with pride but with fear. What if he's calling out of duty, she asked. What if he's calling because he wants to? I replied.
Sometimes it's safer to assume people don't care. That way we don't have to admit very afraid they go.
There it is. The internal choice. Duty keeps people alive. Want keeps them close. The ringing continued. Her thumb hovered over the green button. I told him once, she whispered, that I was not moving into my obituary. And you're not, I said. You're moving into a conversation. For the first time since I met her, I saw something I hadn't seen before. Not regret. Not strength. Oh, malicious. Almost embarrassed. She pressed the button. Hello, she said. Her voice was steady, but softer than the woman who had refused rescue. I couldn't hear Daniel's side. I only saw her face change in slow degrees. Confusion. Surprise. A flicker of something like relief. No, she said at one point. I'm not busy. That sentence hit me harder than any speech she'd given about pride. Because for decades she had been busy. Busy being strong, busy being unbreakable. I'd like that, she said a moment later. Yes, you can come up. The word come felt different this time. Not an invasion. Not an obligation. An invitation. She ended the call but didn't close the phone. He thought I didn't want him here, she said quietly. Did you? Asked. She shook her head once. No. I just didn't want to need him. There's a difference. Dangerous one. The mountain outside looked the same. The goats were still pacing their fence line. The stove was still ticking. But something in that room had shifted. Strength had changed shape. She reached for the volume switch and turned it all the way up. Not defiantly. Not dramatically. Just openly. If you're sitting there thinking this is about a 94-year-old woman in the mountains, it's not. It's about the sentence you might still have time to unsay. It's about the call you might still answer. As I packed my notebook, Margaret stood a little straighter. Not because she needed to prove anything, but because she no longer had to. Tomorrow, she said, almost smiling. I might even call first. And as I stepped outside into the thin mountain air, I realized something that unsettled me in the best possible way. Independence built her house. But vulnerability just reopened the door. And if you're honest with yourself tonight, the question isn't whether someone will call you. It's whether you'll finally pick up. I came back up the mountain expecting celebration. Instead, I found hesitation. Daniel was due the next morning. Snow had melted into thin, stubborn patches along the fence line. Margaret had swept the porch twice already. Not because it needed it, but because waiting does strange things to people who aren't used to it. You nervous? Asked her. I've survived worse, she said automatically. That's the reflex. Strength first. Always strength. But her hands gave her away. They kept adjusting the same stack of mail on the table. Straightening it. Restacking it. What are you afraid of? Asked. She didn't answer at first. She walked over to the window and looked down the road that curves like it's thinking about turning back. I'm afraid, she said finally, that I trained him too well. There it was again. Echo of her life. For decades she taught her children not to depend. Not to complain. Not to collapse. What if they learned the lesson so thoroughly they stopped reaching? If he walks in here, careful, she said quietly. Like I might break. I won't know what to do. That sentence carried more weight than any war story. Because this isn't about survival anymore. It's about surrendering an identity. You can fight storms. You can bury husbands. You can outwork grief. But can you let someone see you older? The truck came just before noon. Not dramatic. No music swelling in the background. Just tires on gravel and an engine cutting off. Margaret didn't move right away. I could still tell him it's a bad day, she said. There it is. The last chance to retreat. If you're watching this and you've ever almost canceled something important because vulnerability felt heavier than pride, you understand that pause. She didn't retreat. The door opened before he knocked. I think she surprised herself. Daniel stood there taller than she remembered. Gray at the temples now. Not a boy anymore. Not someone to protect from reality. For a second they both hesitated. Then he said something that shifted the air in the room. I wasn't sure you wanted me here.
I did accept that line to him me the way I did it. Not sure you wanted me here. How many times have we both assumed the same things?
Not accusation. Not bitterness. Just truth. Margaret didn't answer quickly. She looked at him the way someone studies a photograph they've been carrying in their wallet for years. I was afraid, she said. That word did more work than 35 years of strength. Afraid of what? He asked. Of becoming smaller in your eyes. Silence followed. Not uncomfortable. Just honest. Daniel stepped forward. Not to rescue, not to adjust her chair, not to comment on the cold. He hugged her. Not gently. Firmly. Like a grown man holding someone who doesn't need saving. Only holding. I watched her hands. They hovered for half a second before they wrapped around his back. That hesitation told the whole story. She wasn't used to being carried. Even in something as simple as an embrace. They sat at the table after. Coffee poured. The kind of conversation that doesn't rush. Daniel admitted something then. I called a few times last year, he said. You didn't answer. Margaret's eyes moved to the phone on the counter. I kept it quiet, she replied. Why? Because if I heard it and didn't answer, she said slowly, I could pretend you hadn't called. That was the confession. Not abandonment. Avoidance. Avoidance of proof that someone might still want her. Daniel leaned back, absorbing that. I never thought you needed me, he said. I thought you didn't want me. That's the fracture line of this entire story. 2 generations. Both strong. Both proud. Both assuming the other didn't require closeness. I felt it land in my own chest. How many conversations are buried under mutual assumptions? Margaret reached across the table. Not dramatic. Not cinematic. Just deliberate. I was wrong, she said. You don't hear that often from people in their 90s. Daniel didn't argue. Didn't comfort. Didn't fix. He just nodded. We've got time, he said. The one thing she thought she had to prove she didn't need. They spent the afternoon walking the fence line. Slowly. No rush. He didn't hover. She didn't perform. At one point she stumbled slightly on uneven ground. Old reflex would have snapped. I'm fine. This time she let him steady her. That tiny shift was louder than any speech. When the sun dropped low behind the ridge, they stood on the porch together. You staying the night? She asked him. If you'll have me. A week ago she would have corrected that tone. Today she just said, yes. When I left the mountain that evening, something fundamental had changed. Not her independence. Not her history. Her definition of strength. It wasn't about refusing to be carried. It was about knowing when to allow it. And if you're sitting there thinking this is just about a grandmother and her grandson, it's not. It's about whether the walls you built to survive are now keeping out the very people who'd stand beside you. Margaret didn't lower her mountain. She just opened the door. Tomorrow, we'll see what stays open when pride no longer guards the threshold. The mountain was quiet the morning I left. Not empty. Not lonely. Just quiet in a way that felt earned. Daniel's truck was still parked beside the house. A second set of boots by the door. 2 coffee mugs drying near the sink. Small evidence that something had shifted and stayed. Margaret was already outside when I stepped onto the porch. No dramatic sunrise. No sweeping music. Just thin lights stretching across the ridge and a woman who no longer looked like she was guarding the horizon. You sleep? Yes. Some, she said. We talked late. About what? Ordinary things, she answered. The kind you miss when you're busy being strong. That line lingered. If you've lived long enough, you know this truth. It's rarely the grand moments that haunt you. It's the small, ordinary conversations you didn't have. Daniel stepped out behind her, pulling on his jacket. I'll be back next month, he said. Not a promise swollen with guilt. Not a dramatic vow. Just steady intention. Margaret didn't stiffen. Didn't deflect. "I'll call before that," she said. There it was. Not reaction. Initiation. Later, when Daniel drove off to pick up supplies in town, Margaret and I stood at the fence line. "You're leaving today," she said. "Yes, ma'am." She studied the valley below, then turned toward me. "I spent 35 years proving I could live alone," she said. "Turns out that wasn't the question." "What was the question?" I asked. "Whether I could let someone live with me, without feeling smaller." The wind moved gently across the grass. No resistance in it now. "You afraid of slipping back?" I asked. "Of course," she said. "Pride doesn't retire. It just changes uniforms." That might be the most honest thing she said since I met her. Inside the house, the phone sat on the counter. Volume up. Not as a challenge anymore, just available. She walked over and picked it up. "Watch," she said. No ceremony. No countdown. She scrolled to Daniel's name. Her thumb paused. Not in fear this time, but in awareness. 35 years of habit don't dissolve in a weekend.
Most of us don't lose people because we hate him. We lost them because we won't press call. But it's true.
Then she pressed call. Rang twice. "Hey," she said when he answered. "Just making sure you didn't forget the eggs." Simple. Ordinary. But this time she had called first. She closed the phone and looked at me. "That wasn't so terrible," she said. "No," I replied. "It wasn't." We stood in that kitchen. Two adults who understood how rare it is to witness someone rewrite their definition of strength in real time. "Tell me something," she said suddenly. "When you get home, are you going to wait?" She didn't have to clarify. My mother. The missed calls. The comfortable excuse of busy. I hesitated. And she noticed. "That's what I thought," she said softly. "If you're watching this right now, you already know the call you're postponing." Margaret reached for the volume switch again. Adjusted it higher. Not because she expected it to ring immediately, but because she no longer wanted silence to feel safer than sound. Before I left, she did something unexpected. She hugged me. Not the guarded kind. Not the polite kind. The kind you give when you've stopped performing strength. "Don't make the same mistake twice," she said into my shoulder. "I won't tell you what I did when I reached my truck. That's not for performance. But I will tell you this. The mountain didn't change Margaret. It revealed her. Independence built her life. Love required her to risk it." As I drove down the narrow road, I thought about something she said earlier that morning. "I don't need rescuing," she told me. "But I don't need to hide either." That's the balance most of us are still learning. We confuse being needed with being weak. We confuse calling first with surrender. We confuse silence with dignity. Margaret still lives at the edge of the world. The goats still push against the fence. The winters will still be hard. But the door is open now. And here's the truth I didn't expect to carry back down that mountain. Strength isn't proven by how long you can stand alone. It's proven the moment you decide you don't have to. If there's someone you haven't called, someone you assume will understand, someone you're waiting on out of habit or pride, ask yourself what you're protecting. Because silence feels powerful. Right up until it isn't. The last thing I saw in my rearview mirror was Margaret standing on the porch, phone in hand. Not waiting. Just ready.